The moment those words left his mouth, I felt something inside me snap. "You're not family to me anymore," my son said, his face cold, his eyes like stone. He might as well have driven a knife straight into my chest. You see, I raised that boy with everything I had. Every dollar I earned, every hour I worked, every decision I made, it was all for him. I skipped vacations, worked double shifts, and went without things I needed so he could have everything he wanted. And now he stood in my living room, looking at me like I was some stranger who had overstayed his welcome. There was no hesitation in his voice, no crack of emotion, just pure, calculated detachment. I remember my hands trembling, not from age, but from the sheer disbelief of what I just heard. I wanted to ask him why. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to remind him of every scraped knee I bandaged, every fever I sat beside, every time I went hungry so he could eat. But instead, I stayed silent. Because in that moment, I realized something. If I wasn't family to him anymore, then maybe he wasn't family to me either. And I could make sure he felt the weight of that decision. The days that followed were a blur, but my mind was crystal clear on one thing. I wasn't going to beg for a place in his life. I wasn't going to prove my worth to my own son. No, I was going to show him exactly what it meant to cut someone out. I started small. I pulled his name off my accounts, my insurance, my plans. I deleted the in case of emergency contact that had been his since he was old enough to hold a phone. But that was just the beginning. Because I knew something he didn't. My absence was going to hurt far more than my presence ever did. And when the time came, he would realize exactly what he had thrown away. I started going through old boxes in the attic, the ones filled with photographs, handwritten letters, and little pieces of our family's history, things he probably thought I'd leave for him one day. I placed them carefully into a new box, one that wouldn't be anywhere near his reach. The truth is, memories are more valuable than money. And I wasn't going to let someone who erased me from their heart hold on to the proof that I'd been there all along. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about boundaries. About showing him that love and respect are not guaranteed by blood. They're earned. And the moment he declared me not family, he forfeited every privilege that came with it. I started changing my routines, cutting off the parts of my life where he'd grown accustomed to my presence. No more surprise visits on his birthday. No more Sunday calls just to check in. Silence. Cold, absolute silence. I think the silence hit him first. For years, I'd been the constant voice in his life, the one person who never failed to show up. When that voice was gone, the air must have felt different. But I didn't stop there. There was one final step I was planning. The one that would make him feel exactly what I felt that day. It came in the form of an invitation. Not from me, but from someone he didn't expect. My lawyer. The meeting wasn't long. Just a few papers, a few signatures, and everything that was once his future wasn't anymore. The will was rewritten. Every asset, every property, every investment, redirected to people who had treated me with genuine kindness. People who, unlike my own son, never made me question my worth. I walked out of that lawyer's office feeling lighter than I had in years. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. Because family isn't defined by DNA. It's defined by who shows up when it matters. And if my son couldn't be that for me, then I had no reason to be that for him. It's strange how quickly you can adapt to someone's absence when you've decided they no longer have the right to be present. I stopped looking at my phone for his messages. I stopped expecting him to walk through my door with some half-hearted apology. Weeks turned into months, and the space he once filled in my life became occupied by people who actually cared. Neighbors who brought me soup when I was sick. Friends who invited me over without needing something in return. Even strangers who treated me with more warmth than my own blood. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. The handwriting was his. For a moment, I felt my chest tighten. Old habits die hard. But when I opened it, I saw only 5 words. Can we talk in person? I didn't respond right away. I let it sit on the kitchen counter for days, each time I passed it reminding myself of the cold finality in his voice that night. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. And so, after a week, I agreed to meet him, in a neutral place, not my home. I chose the cafe downtown, the same one where I used to take him for pancakes when he was a boy. He arrived looking older, not in years, but in weight, the kind of weight that sits heavy on the soul. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy I raised. But then, his first words shattered that image. I think we misunderstood each other. Misunderstood. I wanted to laugh. No, I heard him clearly the first time. He had looked at me, his own father, and said I wasn't family anymore. There was nothing unclear about that. So I told him calmly, we didn't misunderstand each other. You made your choice, and I've made mine. He tried to steer the conversation toward inheritance, toward planning for the future. That was when I realized this wasn't an apology. It was an attempt to reclaim what I'd already taken away. I leaned in, my voice steady. You wanted me gone from your life. So I went. And trust me, you won't see me, or anything of mine, again. He froze. Maybe he thought I was bluffing. Maybe he thought blood would be enough to keep the doors open. But as he stared at me, I could see it in his eyes, the realization that he had finally lost something he could never get back. The weeks after that meeting were eerily quiet. No letters, no calls, no unexpected knocks at my door. I knew he was processing what I'd said, or rather, what I hadn't given him. The silence between us became a wall he couldn't climb, and I wasn't about to lower it. Then, one morning, the news came from someone else. A friend of his, a man I'd met only twice, stopped me outside the grocery store. Your son's been talking, he said. He's telling people you've lost your mind, that you're giving everything away out of spite. I smiled, not because it was true, but because it confirmed one thing. My son was rattled. And the more he tried to twist the story, the more it revealed just how much he cared about what I'd taken from him. The truth was simpler. I wasn't acting out of spite. I was acting out of self-respect. And if that made me the villain in his version of events, so be it. I began finalizing my plans. The properties, the savings, the heirlooms, all redirected. Every detail carefully arranged so there would be no loopholes, no chance for him to undo it later. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about ensuring my legacy went to people who valued it. And valued me. The local youth center, for example, where I'd been volunteering quietly for years, or the neighbor's daughter who'd helped me through my surgery without asking for a dime. But the part he didn't see coming was the personal piece, the thing that would cut deeper than money, the family home. The place where he'd grown up, where his mother and I had built a life. I signed it over to someone I knew he despised, not out of cruelty, but to make a point that would echo for the rest of his life. Respect is worth more than walls and a roof. When the papers were filed, I didn't tell them. I wanted him to hear it from someone else, to feel the sting of learning that what he once took for granted now belonged to someone he could never reconcile with. And sure enough, it didn't take long. 2 days later, he showed up at my door, not with anger, but with a face pale and tight, like a man who'd just been told winter would last forever. You gave it to him?" he asked, his voice shaking. I just looked at him and said, "I gave it to someone who saw a value in me when you didn't." He didn't speak for several seconds. His eyes darted away, scanning the porch as if searching for something to hold on to. I could tell he wanted to yell, to demand I undo what had been done, but there was no ground left for him to stand on. "You really hate me that much?" he finally asked. It wasn't anger in his voice this time. It was something else. Something closer to fear. "I don't hate you," I replied quietly. "I just stopped letting you treat me like I don't matter." The words landed heavy. His lips trembled, but no sound came out. For a moment, I thought I saw regret flicker in his expression, but it was gone just as quickly, replaced by the same guarded pride he always wore when he didn't want to admit he'd been wrong. He muttered something under his breath, something about how people would talk, how it would look bad for him. That was when it hit me. He wasn't worried about losing me. He was worried about losing face. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Here was a man more concerned about gossip than the fact that he burned the bridge to his own father. I guess that's the problem, I said. You're more afraid of what people think than what you've become. He opened his mouth to respond, but I shut the door before he could. Not out of cruelty, but because I knew nothing good would come from letting him twist the conversation again. Inside, I leaned against the door and exhaled slowly. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from the sheer weight of finally closing that chapter. The silence afterward was deafening. No footsteps retreating. No car engine starting. Just stillness. I imagined him standing out there, realizing that no words could undo the choices he'd made. And maybe, just maybe, the sting of that silence would be the start of him understanding what respect really means. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was troubled by my choice. Far from it, but because my mind kept replaying the look on his face. It wasn't the anger I'd expected. It was something colder, more unsettled. I sat by the kitchen window, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the moonlight spill across the yard. For years, I'd imagined having a peaceful old age, surrounded by family. Now, I realized peace sometimes meant letting go of the very people you thought you'd grow old with. The phone rang just after midnight. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, it rang again. And again. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. It wasn't my son's voice on the line. It was his wife. She was crying. Between sobs, she blurted out, "I didn't know he was going to say those things to you. I didn't know he would try to push you out like that." I stayed quiet, letting her speak. "He's ashamed," she continued, "but he'll never admit it to your face. He's been walking around the house like a ghost since he found out." I closed my eyes, listening to her words. Part of me wanted to believe she was reaching out to mend things, but another part knew she might just be trying to smooth things over for his sake. "I appreciate the call," I told her, "but you should understand something. This isn't about one argument. This is years of being treated like a burden." She didn't argue. She just whispered, "I know," and hung up. The next morning, I went about my routine as if nothing had happened. Grocery shopping, feeding the birds, chatting with neighbors. But beneath the surface, a strange sense of anticipation grew. Because I knew something he didn't. The person I'd given the house to wasn't planning to live there. They had their own idea for it, one that would keep my son confronting his decision every single day. 2 days later, I got a call from the man I'd signed the deed over to. "Thought you'd like to know," he said, a sly smile audible in his tone. "The renovations start next week." "Renovations?" I asked, even though I already suspected what he meant. "Yeah, we're turning your old place into a community center. Youth programs, music nights, free meals for anyone who needs it." He paused. "And before you ask, yes, it's going to be loud." I couldn't help but chuckle. My son hated noise. He valued silence like gold. The kind of silence where no one bothered him, where he didn't have to deal with anyone else's problems. Now he'd have to live right next door to the busiest place in town. It wasn't revenge exactly. At least, not in the way people think. It was a lesson. A daily, unavoidable reminder that life isn't about shutting people out just because they inconvenience you. Over the next week, I drove by the house a few times. Trucks were parked out front, workers hauling lumber and paint inside. From a distance, I could see my son's curtains drawn tightly shut. One afternoon, I spotted him standing in his driveway, watching as a group of kids laughed and kicked a soccer ball across the lawn. His jaw was clenched so hard I thought it might crack. I parked down the street, unseen, and just observed. For a moment, I wondered if he realized this was all his doing. That if he treated me like family instead of baggage, none of this would be happening. But knowing him, that realization would take time. And time has a way of teaching the lessons pride refuses to hear. That night, I got another call. This time from an old friend who had heard about the gift I'd given. "You're a braver man than I am," he said. "Most folks would have just walked away. You made sure he'd remember it." I thought about that. It wasn't about making him remember me. It was about making him remember what happens when you decide blood doesn't matter anymore. A week after the renovations began, I heard the knock. It was sharp, impatient, the kind of knock you use when you're not here to visit, but to confront. I opened the door slowly, and there he was. My son. He didn't step inside. Instead, he stood on the porch like a salesman who'd rather be anywhere else. His arms were crossed, eyes darting to the floor before locking on mine. "So, you gave it to him," he said flatly. I didn't answer. I just let the silence stretch. "You knew I couldn't stand him," he continued, the words trembling between anger and disbelief. "You knew." "I knew," I said finally. "That's why it mattered." His jaw tightened. "You're punishing me." I shook my head. "I'm teaching you. Punishment ends. Lessons stay." He laughed bitterly, but there was no humor in it. "Do you have any idea what it's like over there now? There are cars parked up and down the street every night, music blaring, people in and out at all hours. It's chaos." "I imagine it is," I said, sipping my coffee. "But maybe you should try walking over there. Meet the people. Hear their stories. You might learn something." He scoffed. "I don't need to learn anything from strangers." I took a step forward, closing the gap between us. "That's exactly your problem. You think the only people worth your time are the ones who can give you something. But life doesn't work like that." For the first time since he arrived, he didn't have a quick reply. He just stood there, shifting his weight, eyes narrowing like he was trying to figure out if I was bluffing. "I came here to ask." He hesitated. "To ask if you'd reconsider." "No," I said before he could finish. "Not this time." He looked away, and for a moment I thought he might walk off without another word. But instead he muttered, "You've changed." "No," I said softly. "I just finally stopped letting you change me." 2 nights later, I saw him again. But this time, he wasn't on my porch. He was across the street, standing in front of the community center that used to be my home. The lights inside spilled onto the lawn, laughter echoing from within. Through the glass doors, I could see children weaving between tables, teenagers helping set up chairs, and a group of older folks swapping stories over coffee. It was alive in a way it had never been when I lived there alone. He stood there for a long time, his hands buried deep in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. Every so often, he glanced toward the window, as if trying to decide whether to step inside or turn away. Finally, he did neither. He just sank down onto the curb, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground. I didn't approach him. Some moments aren't meant to be interrupted. I watched from my car, the hum of the engine low, my breath fogging the windshield. Part of me wanted to tell him the truth, that I hadn't given the house away to hurt him, but to open his eyes, that I still hoped, somewhere deep down, he might understand. But another part of me knew he wasn't ready for that truth yet. Lessons don't bloom overnight. They need space, time, and a little discomfort to take root. The next morning, a neighbor told me she'd seen my son at the center again, this time actually talking to people. Not for long, but enough that it was noticed. I didn't smile, but I felt something loosen in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, the message was finding its way through the cracks in his pride. That weekend, I drove past again, slow enough to take in the sight. He was there, standing beside the man he once swore was his enemy. They weren't laughing, not yet, but they were talking. It wasn't reconciliation, not by a long shot, but it was a start. And sometimes, a start is all you need. I didn't stop the car. I didn't wave. I just kept driving, knowing the seed was planted. Whether it grew or not was up to him. A month passed before I saw him again up close. It was a Sunday morning, the kind where the streets are quiet except for the sound of a lawnmower a few houses down. I was sitting on my porch, coffee in hand, when his car pulled into my driveway. He didn't get out right away. Just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. Eventually, the door opened, and he walked toward me with a heaviness in his step that I hadn't seen in years. "Can I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. I nodded, saying nothing. For a while, we just sat there, the air thick with all the things we weren't saying. Then he finally spoke. "I went there again last night," he said. "The community center." I raised an eyebrow. "I helped fix one of the leaky sinks in the bathroom," he continued. "Didn't tell anyone who I was. Didn't want them to think I was just there because of you." "That's good," I said quietly. He glanced at me, his expression tight. "I didn't get it before. Why you'd do something like that? Why you'd give up everything you built?" "And now?" I asked. He sighed, staring out at the street. "I still don't like it, but I think I understand." We sat in silence again, but this time it felt lighter. "I'm not saying we're fixed," he admitted, "but maybe, I don't know. Maybe I've been looking at things the wrong way." I didn't press him. Change is like a tide. You don't force it. You let it come in its own time. When he stood to leave, he hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps. "Dad, I don't hate you. I never did." "I know," I said, watching him walk back to his car. "I just needed you to remember that." As his car disappeared around the corner, I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. Some battles aren't won with shouting or ultimatums. Some are won by stepping back and letting the other person find their way in the dark, until they realize they've been walking toward you all along. 3 weeks later, I was at the community center myself, repairing a loose step on the front porch. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the wind smells faintly of wood smoke and the sky feels endless. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see him, my son, carrying 2 large bags of groceries. No hesitation this time. He walked straight up the steps, set the bags down, and gave me a short nod. "They said they needed food for the weekend programs," he explained. Figured I could help. It wasn't an apology, but it didn't have to be. Actions speak louder than words, and this one was shouting. Inside, I watched as he unloaded cans, bread, and fresh fruit onto the counter. The volunteers greeted him warmly, none of them aware of our complicated history. For a moment, I just stood in the doorway, letting the scene soak in. Later that afternoon, we found ourselves sitting on the back steps of the center, sharing a thermos of coffee. "You know," he said slowly, "when you gave this place away, I thought you were punishing me." "I wasn't," I replied. "I was reminding you that some things aren't meant to be owned. They're meant to be shared." He took a long sip of coffee, then gave a small, almost reluctant smile. "I think I'm starting to get it." We sat there until the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. For the first time in years, our silence wasn't heavy. It was comfortable. When he finally stood to leave, he didn't just say goodbye. He put a hand on my shoulder and said, "See you next week, Dad." It was a simple sentence, but it carried the weight of a bridge being rebuilt, plank by plank. I stayed on the steps long after he was gone, watching the last light fade from the sky. The center buzzed with laughter behind me, and I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Because sometimes the only way to hold on is to let go first. A few months later, winter settled in. Snow dusted the streets, and the air bit at your nose the moment you stepped outside. The community center was glowing with warm light, bustling with people escaping the cold. I was there early, helping set up tables for the holiday dinner, when the door opened and in walked my son, carrying not 1, but 3 large boxes wrapped in paper. The volunteers cheered when they saw him. He grinned, shaking snow from his coat. Brought a few gifts for the kids, he said, looking my way briefly before setting the boxes down. Throughout the night, I watched him. He laughed easily, helped serve food, and even stayed late to clean up. At one point, he caught me looking and gave me a nod, not just a greeting, but an acknowledgement. A silent message. I'm here. I'm not running anymore. When the night was winding down, we stepped outside together. The street was quiet, the snow crunching under our boots. You know, he began, I used to think family was about blood and names on a piece of paper, about inheritance. But I was wrong. What changed your mind? I asked. You did, he said simply. When you gave away the house, I thought you'd lost your mind. But now I see, you were giving me something more important. A lesson I didn't even know I needed. We stood there for a long moment, breath hanging in the cold night air. Dad, he said quietly, I'm sorry. For all of it. I put a hand on his shoulder, feeling the weight of years between us slowly lift. I know, son, and I forgive you. We walked to our cars, and before getting in, he turned back. Same time next week. Wouldn't miss it, I replied. Driving home that night, I realized something profound. The house, the money, the possessions, they were never the foundation of our family. The real foundation was moments like this. And sometimes, to build something stronger, you have to tear down the walls that kept you apart.